In today's video, I've set ourselves a bit of a challenge. Can we buy just the cheapest Nvidia graphics card we can off eBay? And what do we actually get sent if we spend just £1? Right, so to kick off the start of the next month, I've only gone and done it and gone back on eBay, and I've been buying more worthless PC parts, this time being a full Asus Nvidia graphics card for just £1.11. If we actually look at this, 12 pence of this was buyer's protection, and it's meant to be an in-box Nvidia graphics card made by Asus. So why don't we get this thing open and see what they've actually sent us. I can't exactly say the size of this package is giving me much hope, because if we actually take a small graphics card and plonk it on top, actually about the same size as this, doesn't exactly bode well. But let's get this thing open and find out what we've been sent. I think it was also sent untested as well, so this could just straight up not work. But that's how you get these bargains. You've got to buy things that are completely untested. Oh, it's here. It says Asus. Asus in search of incredible. 0 decibel silent cooling, so no fan. 1 gigabyte of DDR3 super alloy power and GPU tweak. Now, to my knowledge, there's 2 versions of these. One that is awful. Well, not awful, but one that was essentially a Fermi graphics card. Very similar to this GT430, but re-released. And then there was an actual Kepler one, which was modern, at least as modern as Kepler can be described. Any other info? VGA compatible to a CRT and PhysX. Is there anything about gaming? Born faster, stay cooler and stable, and it supports DirectX 11. There is no information on here about what version of this graphics card it could be. So when you complain about the GT 1030 being confusing, the 730's even worse. Right, let's get this thing open. At the end of the day, it's an in-box graphics card for £1. At least we get a box. We've got the graphics card itself. It's a big boy. That is a big graphics card, actually. It's only got 2 screws. HDMI, VGA, DVI. It also looks like it's got wet. We've also got the low bracket that doesn't look like it fits this card. Okay. Another low bracket that also doesn't look like it fits this card. We've got the driver and GPU tweak and the Asus speed setup with a funky first page, featuring graphics cards that look a lot more powerful than what we've actually got today. Maybe it's a Kepler version, maybe it's a Fermi version, but for £1, we'll find out. I must admit, it's always fun doing these projects, because even if I don't need a GT 730, well, now I've got one. So we get to find out what some of these lower end cards are like, and if you should spend £1 or £2 or dollars on one of these. Probably not, but you can. And I think one of the main reasons I don't mind buying cards like this completely untested is because they are so basic that there's not really anything on them to break. So this should work all okay. Well, it's saying no HDMI cable, but let's see what it actually does. No fans, so we can't really see if it ramps up that way. Oh, there we go, we did get a signal out of it. So it does turn on. Does it install drivers? And we want the GT 730, which does make me wonder, if this is a Fermi version of this card, did some Fermi cards get better drivers or more up-to-date drivers? We'll let those download anyway. It's not like it's blocking off any cooling, because this thing has no cooling. What's it saying in Device Manager? Does Device Manager tell us anything? Display Adapters says ATI Radeon HD 4300/4500 series. What's going on there? Oh, no. I'm not doing Terascale 1. They can't send me a low-end Terascale 1 card. Terascale 1 is the devil. Have I been scammed on a GT 730? Yeah, this isn't a GT 730. This card here is a Radeon. I've been scammed on garbage for worse garbage. Oh my god, what specs do we even have? So 40 unified shaders mean this is a 4300 or 4350. DDR2, not DDR3. 64-bit memory bus. Yeah, this is shit. That's the honest answer. This is garbage. Let's just take a little look at this graphics card real quick and see what it actually is. So I'm not going insane, I've just brought up the description. Asus Nvidia GeForce GT 730 with 1GB of DDR3. This unit is untested and I do not have a rig to test it on, hence selling cheap. Well, cheap being £1. So if we actually look at the card itself, I've seen GT 730s look like this. It's a big passive version, it's kind of cool, and maybe it'd make for a somewhat interesting video. But if we look even closer, I don't know if you can see down the bottom here, HD 4350 silent. This is a Radeon, and it's not a good Radeon either. So I've been had over on a £1 graphics card. We also have this waterlogged sticker on the back where it looks like it's got either very hot or very damp, where it's a 4350 silent 512MB D2. This is woeful. This is really bad. Plug this in and see if it'll actually do something. Maybe we can overclock it. And these cards never got the Nemez team drivers. These were on the old Leshkat team modded drivers. I mean, there's no point returning it for my money back because it's not like they've scammed me majorly. Do we have graphical acceleration? Hardware shadows are not supported. The automatic drivers for Terrascale 1 were notoriously finicky, and in this case don't want to work. What drivers do exist? Well, we've got my old video when we Google it, but that's 7 years out of date, and that one's about Terrascale 2, not Terrascale 1. See, that's the problem with Terrascale 1, is they are so unsupported that even AMD's own drivers don't really work. I mean, we can go to the AMD driver webpage and see what the last version was. And the last drivers were 13.1 or the 13.4 beta. I guess when you spend this little money, you've got to double check that you're getting what you paid for. Now, I do actually have some interesting parts coming through in the post. I've got some PCs coming that seem to be good value. I've got some stuff that's clearly scams. I've even got some weird bits of hardware from China coming that's actually cool and is actually legit, like they're real parts. But this is just going to be a nightmare. Installation complete. View log for warning. That's what you want to see. That's the average Terrascale experience. Well, look at that. We have drivers installed. Oh yes, that's an experience right there. That's the performance we paid for. 10 FPS. Don't care if it cooks itself because this graphics card is abysmal. Can it manage 3D Mark? Well, we'll run through CloudGate because that's about the newest benchmark this can run, and then we'll run it again after doing an overclock, see what this scores in terms of performance, but I don't think this video is going to be proving anything we didn't know. Maybe Terrascale will surprise us. We've not really tested it much on Windows 11, so you never know. Maybe Windows 11 has got a fix for the original Terrascale. You never know with these things. But we'll run this through, see what performance it gets, and then overclock it, try again, and go from there. What a disappointment already. And that frame rate just makes it more disappointing. Well, hopefully it burns. Well, that scores riveting, 1247. There's nothing exciting about this graphics card at all. I mean, you could argue it's silent, but so is integrated graphics and not having this in my system at all. Right, will the core just max out? No, it dies. We've killed it already. Okay, 725 is stable, 500 is stable. Put it through 3D Mark again, find out what the score is, go from there. That is our card, we are ready to do some benchmarks. Fascinating stuff here. Now, after going through all of this and eventually getting the system all set up and working, we did manage to get a little bit of an overclock on our HD 4350. And while that's running through, I could talk to you about the history of this graphics card, but honestly, it's disappointing enough that I've actually paid for this card. I have no use for a Terrascale 1 based display adapter that doesn't even have a fan on it at all whatsoever. There is no purpose to owning a graphics card like this. I mean, yes, you could argue that it's got DirectX 10 capabilities for all 3 games that actually run on DirectX 10. It's also running with AMD's awful drivers, which fortunately we've managed to fix a little bit by running the modified Leshkat drivers that are still floating around on the internet. Either way, what you need to know is it's a boring display adapter based on AMD's Terrascale 1, it supports DirectX 10 at maximum, and it is very, very boring. In terms of an overclock though, we did see an increase of just over 36% by changing around both the memory and the core. Now, I probably was pushing things a tad too hard here, as when the graphics card started going north of 80 degrees, you could get a little bit of artifacting. But at the end of the day, I want to eke out as much extra performance from this card as I possibly can. There is no other use to this card than trying to eke out every little extra percentage. But how does this actually compare to its peers? Surely this overclock makes it somewhat decent? Well, not that 3D Mark is a perfect indicator of performance, but compared to the HD 5450, a woeful display adapter that's slightly better, the legendary awful GT210, and even the much maligned HD 2500 chip from Intel, it performs much worse even with an overclock. So to say that I really don't like this card is a bit of an understatement. Now once again, this isn't exactly reflective of real-world performance, as AMD does have some tricks up its sleeve that did help performance back in the day, blah 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 blah, very exciting, very good news. Unfortunately, AMD's Terascale 1 drivers were left in such a poor state most of these optimizations don't actually work in newer titles, and the Leshkat drivers can only help us so much. So that is about the extent of the extra performance we can eke out of this. But it really is the epitome of everything that goes wrong with trying to buy these cheap graphics cards. You know what, I really did try. I have tried to buy something that is not a low-end AMD display adapter, just out of principle of trying to do something different. I ordered something that even specifically said in the title and the description, this is an Nvidia GeForce GT 730. It even showed pictures that lead you to believe it's a GT 730 with the box it comes with. You open it up and you think you've got a GT 730, and then you look at it, and no, you have once again got a Terascale 1 based turd. And just what are the specifications of that Terascale 1 based turd for all two of you that really want to know? Well, the HD 4350 is a very exciting chip, coming in based on Terascale 1 from 2008. It has 80 shading units that do absolutely nothing, it has 8 TMUs that combined with 4 ROPs did, you guessed it, absolutely nothing. Our version here does have half a gigabyte of RAM, but it's DDR2 running through a 64-bit memory bus, which is just making a bad card even worse because some did actually get DDR3. And what else is exciting about it? Well, it uses 20 watts, that is until you overclock it to try and actually get some performance out of it, and then I don't even know how much it begins to use. And it just supports nothing. DirectX 10 is the highest it goes. There's about 5 games that use that, including Crysis and GTA at least. OpenGL support tops out at 3.3, which means you can do some things with it. But I guarantee there's already someone leaping down to the comments section to say, but did you know that on Linux they're actually supporting Terascale cards and they're making them run Vulkan? Well, yeah, they are on Terascale 2 and 3, and it's very early experimental. Nothing supports these cards. The best you can do for drivers is to use the Leshkat versions like we're using here, as I showed in a video 8 years ago. Before anyone jumps in to support these cards, my main annoyance is I didn't pay for this card, I don't want this card, and it serves no purpose. It's weaker than even an Intel HD 2000i GPU in most instances. At least that's what 3D Mark tells you, but it goes head to head with Intel HD. That isn't great. Now, despite all of my annoyances with this card and how little I'm looking forward to doing any benchmarking on it, I am giving it the fairest chance possible. We are going to be running the overclock regardless if the card artifacts or not, because all we want to do is see that frame rate in the top left. The card is stable and it is getting to run the best modded drivers that do actually exist for it. There are numerous problems that exist in the abandoned Terascale drivers, ranging from lack of utilization in modern titles like GTA, resulting in stuttering and multiple problems, that are actually somewhat fixed by the Leshkat version of drivers. So we are going to be giving it the best chance it has in modern titles and some classic titles as well. The problem with trying to run modern titles, as I've said, is DirectX 10 support doesn't really exist. No games really ever took it on, and then it was quickly replaced with DirectX 11, which this card can't run. There's lots of titles like Assassin's Creed Black Flag that say, yes, we support DirectX 10, and then you can't make it launch. Anyway, that's enough rambling, that's enough talking, that's enough insulting to this graphics card. Is it actually so bad for the £1 we paid that I am right to despise it in the benchmarks? Starting off the benchmarks, thanks to the advent of the Leshkat drivers, we did actually see GTA 5 receive some actual utilization here. And even with half a gigabyte of RAM, which was responsible for some stuttering and slowdown in places when there was lots going on, we did actually manage to run the game with normal settings and shadows turned on. Wow, shadows are enabled and they're even set to soft. That's impressive, with 33 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 24 FPS. Now, this is running a game that came out 7 years after the launch of the card, and this is nothing more than a display adapter. So this is actually somewhat impressive to see. I will actually give the card this. It shouldn't be running this game this well. But once again, GTA 5 is beautifully optimized, does actually use DirectX 10.1, and actually seems to run okay on the card thanks to the modified drivers. It wasn't a perfect experience, but it was one that was at least playable. GTA Online, on the other hand, actually ran better than I was expecting as well. Usually with GTA Online in these larger lobbies, as we've seen, utilization on most cards completely plummets and it's unplayable. But for some reason, this is an issue that seems to plague terascale cards, but it seems to have miraculously fixed itself here. Oh lord, that's amazing. With 32 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 22 FPS in the normal settings with soft shadows that we also used in single player in the 400x300 resolution. Now, it could drop down to the mid-20s when lots was going on, and did actually have a worse frame rate overall than the single player experience, but there was such little between them that honestly I'm going to give this a pass and say it was just about playable, albeit a little bit fuzzy when lots was going on. Now, we actually did turn up the resolution here with the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim running with low settings in 800x600. Now, it's also worth noting this game did come out, 3 years after the graphics card did, so once again, it is somewhat admirable it's doing as well as it is here, with 41 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 32 FPS. Now, that DDR2 RAM was certainly hindering things here, as I have seen the DDR3 version of this card actually do quite a bit better than this. But still, at the end of the day, we did see a playable experience. Admittedly, the ghosts of objects and people would fly towards you at an alarming pace if you were moving quite quickly. So Skyrim worked fine, it just had a very short draw distance and a lot of pop-in. Now, this game is actually advertised in the AMD drivers from this era because they put a lot of money into the technology like TresFX and things like that in it. Not that you'll be enabling them here, but it was impressive to see that Tomb Raider with low settings in 800x600 actually does work really well on these Terascale 1 cards. In fact, it does make me almost want to have a soft spot for them and go and revisit them at some point, and maybe we will. Averages of 35 FPS with 1% lows down to 28 FPS during the built-in benchmark would pretty much indicate that this game would be playable, albeit looking a bit bad, on this HD 4350. Now, one of my main issues here, and probably one of the reasons why I seem a little bit resentful, even though the performance is actually somewhat okay, is take Counter-Strike for example. We ordered a graphics card that can actually launch and probably play Counter-Strike 2. We've now got one that can't launch Counter-Strike 2 and is back stuck playing Counter-Strike Source. Now, admittedly with mixed settings, so a mixture of low, medium and high, just to get the best visual fidelity in 1280x720, 720p, we saw 112 FPS on average, which is kind of what this graphics card was for. Back in the day, you could buy one of these and you could play the games that had just come out a couple of years later as well, admittedly with mixed settings, and you could enjoy them at a decent frame rate in high definition resolutions. I can't fault the card for doing this, because it was doing it well. So Counter-Strike Source works fine, it's what the card was always designed for, but it ain't running Counter-Strike 2 because those games don't launch on this card. Next up, I did want to test a city builder, and one of the latest ones out there was City Skylines. Once again, we're not going to be able to run City Skylines 2 because even that does require DirectX 11. Would you believe it? We don't have DirectX 11 here. Have I said it already? Probably. Do I care? No. City Skylines 2, not City Skylines 2, I'm getting confused there. City Skylines 1 ran with an average of 21 FPS and 1% lows down to 11 FPS with the lowest settings in 640x480. It is almost completely unplayable with how little you're able to read things, but that didn't still stop me getting around 10 to 12 minutes of gameplay, building up the same benchmark city we've been using across a couple of maps now. So City Skylines is playable, but only if you're really desperate to play a city builder. Probably stick to SimCity 2013 or SimCity 4 for a much better experience. To pitch the HD 4350 up against a game that is very difficult to run even on some brand new graphics cards, we have Black Mesa running the Zen levels with the potato options in the 800x600 resolution. Now, it did achieve an admirable 31 FPS here and 1% lows down to 21 FPS. Which is actually understandable given how intensive this section of the game is and how good it looks even with these potato settings. Now, this is actually better performance than we'd see on something like a GT 210, so it was at least something going for the card. In fact, you know what, the performance we've seen so far does indicate that at least with the Leshkat drivers, it is better than a GT 210, which isn't something that you usually consider or want to compare to as a benchmark, but you know, we're going to give the card that something there. It is doing better than the benchmarks that we started with would ever indicate. Now, this is a tricky one. There's no running Mountain Blade Bannerlord here. Instead, we have to drop ourselves back to the Mountain Blade Warband benchmark, where usually we just run Vikings Conquest, because it does actually add a few nice graphical effects and some decent texture quality upgrades. Not that it's a particularly pretty looking game at some points, but it can look okay in places, with medium and high settings in the 800x600 resolution. Now, in a medium-sized battle, we were able to achieve 46 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 35 FPS. In larger battles you could shave off around 15 FPS, but it still would be playable at around 30 FPS or so I'm going to say Mountain Blade Warband is playable with the Vikings Conquest DLC. Just, you're going to have to stick to 800x600, which isn't something you usually have to do with this game. Now, indie titles will still run on it provided they are using OpenGL and haven't swapped over to Vulkan or a newer form of DirectX. Project Zomboid is probably a great example of this, still able to run with the latest version with medium settings in 720p. But titles like BeamNG and things like that, well, they just aren't going to work on a card like this anymore. You can go through and download an older version, but that's the only way you'd get games that have modernized running on this. Either way, back to the task at hand, Project Zomboid medium settings 720p, 32 FPS on average, and okay 1% lows. There were some quirky things going on with the UI, but honestly, at the end of the day, it's running, that's good enough. Now, I did want to go through and test things in titles like Minecraft to see if it could still manage those as well, and miraculously, still in 2025, provided you're running the Java version of the game, you can run the game with fancy settings in a 720p resolution. Now, we did actually see 64 FPS on average once the game had loaded in and everything is settled down, with rather decent 1% lows as well. So Minecraft is actually still playable, but you do have to temper your expectations. The big kicker here was to actually drop the resolution down to 720p, and by putting it in full screen, it gave the card a much better chance. By doing this, we pretty much doubled our frame rate up from 30 to 60, which felt a lot more playable. So Minecraft, well, it still works fine on the 4350. You probably shouldn't buy one for Minecraft, but it'll run if that's your only option. Now, one area the card does excel is if you wanted to whack this in a Windows Vista or Windows XP era PC, well, the drivers for things like that do work a lot better than they work on probably Windows 8, 10 and 11 onwards. So think about it, for those newer operating systems, the drivers really do fall behind, but for older titles on an older operating system, you'll see even better performance than we're seeing here. Now, this really exemplifies that when the card runs well, thanks to our overclock, it runs hot and the artifacting begins, but honestly, it was more interesting to me just watching how the card would break down the geometry in different ways than actually playing through this section of Halo again on a card I didn't really want to, because I knew it could already run the game, but we now knew it runs with high settings in 1600x900. That's fascinating. You could still get frame drops in places, but then again it's using DDR2 and a 64-bit memory bus, but that is what this card is good for. Older games, higher settings, older system than this. And a GT 730, well, it'll handle those as well, and that would have been preferable to actually having this graphics card in my PC. But finally, the big one, the thing we all want to know, probably one of the best DirectX 10 games that is out there that you'd actually want to use DirectX 10 for. Can it run Crysis? Well, with medium settings and DirectX 10 enabled, which is something you can't do on an RTX 5080, you can do it here though, we managed to run Crysis with 31 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 20 FPS. Although we did have to use an 800x600 resolution to actually keep some of the eye candy turned on. In some places it did actually look okay, in others it did look questionable, but at the end of the day, it is a £1 graphics card running Crysis. Would the GT 730 have probably done a better job? Once again, yes. But is it doing an okay job here? Well, also yes. Now, there are numerous ways to look at this. Do we look at it like the HD 4350, the much maligned display adapter that serves no real purpose, is actually doing somewhat okay? You know, it's actually managing some games that are a good few years after its release, admittedly with low settings and low resolutions. Or do we look at it that we paid very little for this graphics card and were able to play at least one of the most popular games out there with GTA 5 and also Minecraft on it? Or do we look at it the way that seems more apparent, where the HD 4350 is doing okay, but if we actually got the graphics card we paid for, which is still £1, well then we'd end up with a lot more performance, a lot more API support, and a lot more interesting benchmarks, where we aren't exactly sitting back and going, wow, Halo Combat Evolved in a HD resolution, isn't that fantastic? So yeah, performance is weird, because for £1, yes, we've got some gaming done, but it is still a redundant graphics card when it is literally fighting against Intel HD graphics. So it really is a tricky one, because on paper, you can get Intel HD graphics for, what, 10p with a Core i5-2400? And it'd be giving this a run for its money? Maybe sometimes better, maybe sometimes worse, but at least you could guarantee you'd get better drivers on Intel HD. It truly is a bit of a weird one. I'd like to say that I'm going to be optimistic and focus on the fact that I was surprised by some of the benchmarks, even if we did overclock it so much that it was heating up to the stage it was artifacting. But yeah, it's just a tad bland, isn't it? Now, there are a couple of things we could talk about, like the stability of the drivers, and admittedly, I was still impressed that these old Leshkat drivers were still able to keep up in things like GTA and GTA Online that have seen numerous updates since the last time we tested it 7 years ago. But really, they do still break some things. Notably, Catalyst Control Center, the old AMD driver GUI, well, that now displays no options to add enhancements or anything of the sort. You've got no AMD overdrive, you've got nothing like that working because of these drivers, and they would still work if you use something like the 13.4 beta drivers. It doesn't make much of a difference, but it is still an interesting point to note that they don't work, and mysteriously they could actually control the processor. So despite being drivers that are old and modified, they still do recognize AMD's Ryzen, which was kinda cool to see. You could control the clock speed and the power plan, but at least it's something. So the card ran hot, that's something else. It's got no fan and we were running an overclock on it. If you got rid of the overclock, those artifacts would disappear until it got warm again. Yes, I could change the thermal paste, but I can't really be bothered, so it didn't get new thermal paste. We can just let it run at like 85 degrees. So that's about as all, that's the only other information I've got to say on the card. That is it. So there we have it. We decided to set out and buy a cheap Nvidia graphics card, the cheapest Nvidia graphics card I could get on eBay, and in a cruel turn of fate that is almost poetic for this channel, we ended up with a Terascale 1 base graphics card from AMD. And that is really the summary here. We ordered Nvidia, we got AMD, it wasn't a great card, but it did something. I really wish there was some redeeming factor, because I did want a GT 730. I didn't care if it was Kepler or Fermi, but it directly relates to a video we made a few weeks ago on the GT 430, where we could actually see, was there a performance increase from the rebrands, or in another instance, where say they send us the Kepler version of this card, did changing low-end display adapters over to Kepler offer a bigger increase over their previous Fermi line? There was a lot of questions waiting to be answered, all bundled up in the promise of a £1 graphics card, and it all bundles down to, I ended up with AMD's Terascale again. The irony writes itself. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this mysterious everything's gone wrong video. As I said, I've got lots of interesting bits coming this month. Plenty of bits from China. I've got some cool bits of hardware, some scams. I've got some budget PCs. I've had one that just arrived, which really is meant to be a gaming computer, so stick around for that later on in the week. So thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this mess of a video, and good night.